So let's continue with the Section 704 of the Classification and General Requirement of all buildings by use of occupancy. In this, we have the location of property. So in general, no building shall be constructed unless it adjoins or has direct access to a public space, yard, or street on at least one of its sides. So for the purpose of this section, the center line of an adjoining street or alley shall be considered an adjacent property line. So here, eaves over required window shall not be less than 750 millimeters from the side and rear property lines. So for fire resistance of walls, exterior wall shall have fire resistance and opening protection in accordance with the requirements set forth by the Secretary. Projections beyond the exterior wall shall not exceed beyond a point one-third the distance from an assumed vertical plane located where the fire resistant protection of openings is first required to the location on property, whichever is the least restrictive. So distance shall be measured at right angles from the property line. When openings in exterior walls are required to be protected due to distance from property line, the sum of the areas of such openings in any story shall not exceed 50% of the total area of the wall in that story. So that's how fire resistance of walls works. So let's proceed to buildings on same property and building containing courts. For the purpose of determining the required wall and opening protection, buildings on the same property and court wall shall be assumed to have a property line between them. So here it is explained that when a building is to be erected on the same property with an existing building, they assume property line from the existing building shall be the distance to the property line for each occupancy as set forth by the Secretary, provided the two or more buildings on the same property may be considered as one building if the aggregate area of such building is within the limits of allowable floor areas for a single building. So that's the end of the section 704. So let's proceed with section 705, wherein it explains the allowable floor areas. So the allowable floor areas for one-story building and buildings over one story shall not exceed the limits prescribed by the Secretary for each occupancy, groups, and or types of construction. For purposes of this section, each portion of a building separation by one or more area separation walls may be considered a separate building provided the area separation walls meet the requirements described thereof by the Secretary. So for section 706, the allowable floor areas increases. So the floor areas herein above provided may be increased in certain specific instances and under appropriate condition, based on the existence of public space, streets or yards extending along the adjoining two or more sides of the building or structure subject to the approval of the building official. So another section is the section 707, wherein it explains the maximum height of buildings. The maximum height and number of stories of every building shall be dependent upon the character of occupancy and the type of construction, as determined by the Secretary, considering population, the density, the building bulk, width of streets, and car parking requirements. The height shall be measured from the highest adjoining sidewalk or ground surface, provided that the height measured from the lowest adjoining surfaces shall not exceed such minimum height by more than 3 meters, except, so this section accepts that towers, spires, and steeples erected as part of a building and not used for habitation or storage are limited to a height only by structural design if completely of incombustible materials or may extend not to exceed 6 meters. So remember this, not to exceed 6 meters above the height limits for each occupancy group if of combustible materials. So that's more of an additional understanding or additional ideas. So let's proceed to the section 708, which is the minimum requirements for Group A dwellings. So dwellings, location, and lot occupancy. So the dwelling shall occupy not more than 90% of a corner lot and 80% of an inside lot, and subject to the provisions on easement on light and view of the Civil Code of the Philippines, and it shall be at least 2 meters from the property line. So letter B is the light and ventilation. So every dwelling shall be so constructed and arranged as to provide adequate light and ventilation as provided under section 605 of this code. Section 805. So this section 805 will be discussed further by the next reporter or the next next reporter. So letter C is the sanitation. Every dwelling shall be provided with at least one sanitary toilet and adequate washing and drainage facilities. So these are one of the requirements. So these are very common, especially on every buildings, ganon. So another is the foundation. Footing shall be of sufficient size and strength to support the load of the dwelling and shall be at least 250 millimeters thick and 600 millimeters below the surface of the ground. So another is the post. The dimension of wooden post shall be those found on table 708A. The dimension of wooden post or the annexure B1, each post shall be anchored to such footing by strap and bolts of adequate size. So here is the table 708A of our SIM or our self-instructional manual. So here we have the dimensions of wooden posts or support tails. So as you can see, we have from a one-story shed to a two-story house. So given the maximum height of posts, the maximum spacing of support tails, and the required maximum finish sizes. So logs or trees support tails may be used as posts in indigenous traditional type of construction, provided that these are of such sizes and spacing as to sustain vertical loading equivalent to at least to the loading capacities of the post and spacing in these tables. So another is the floor. So the live load of the first floor shall be at least 200 kilograms per square meters, and for the second floor at least 150 kilograms per square meter. So that's one of the requirements. So another is we have the roof, the stairs, and the entrance and exit. So for the roof, we have the wind load for roof shall be at least 120 kilograms per square meters for vertical projections. And for the stairs naman, the stairs shall be at least 750 millimeters in clear width with a rise of 200 millimeters and a minimum run of 200 millimeters. And for the entrance and exit, there shall be at least one entrance and another one for exit. So for electrical requirements, All electrical installations shall conform to the requirements of the Philippine Electrical Code. And for the mechanical requirements, we have mechanical systems and or equipment installation shall be subject to the requirements of the Philippine Mechanical Engineering Code. So, for the last section of these guidelines, we have the requirements for other group occupancies. So, subject to the provision of this code, the Secretary shall promulgate rules and regulations for each and other group occupancies covering allowable construction, height and area, location on property, exit facilities, light, ventilation and sanitation, enclosure for vertical openings, fire extinguishing system, and special hazard. So that would be the end of the report on the chapter 7 or the classification and general requirement of all buildings by use of occupancy.